Hello, techies. Welcome to the Tech Times Africa podcast, where we'll bring you the latest stories on tech and startups in Africa. Catch us every Thursday at 10 a.m. WAT on techtimesafrica.podbean.com. Let us know what you think by giving us feedback in the comments or on our socials. Now, on with the show. We will be talking about Zimbabwe's new phone registration policy, Equinix investments to expand internet access in southern Nigeria. We would also touch on Ghana's 5G push and Starlink that usually gets a shout with us. I'm Kelvin. With me here is Karen. How are you doing today?
Hi, techies. I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to some of the topics that we have today because we have quite a few that are not from the typical Kenya-Nigeria scene. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's the variety that comes with talking about tech in Africa. As much as Nigeria and Kenya dominate tech, it's always good to see some development in other countries. So speaking of, Zimbabwe is trying to push a new phone registration policy. Basically, what they want is for everyone to register their phones to a telecom body. So it's not a SIM card registration because a lot of African countries, including Zimbabwe, already have that. They want people to register mobile devices. When I saw it, I was like, what's the worst that could happen with that? The worst that can happen with that is the government can use that to track people, I guess. So people are skeptical about this policy because I believe in Africa, we have seen governments around the continent use internet access as a tool, especially during elections or political crisis. They are used as tools to suppress voices. So people are quite skeptical about this, and it's understandable, but I wasn't really expecting this from Zimbabwe. Obviously, I'm not well versed in what goes on in Zimbabwe, but it seems people have some serious reasons for concern. But I already see that Kenya also has a similar policy, but there isn't outrage about that. So I wonder what's your take on this, Karen?
I think this is a double-edged sword because on the one hand, with a proper government that is transparent and that is for its people, this is a good tool because number one, yes, it is a tool for security. You're able to track criminals to where they are. You're able to stop some crimes when it comes to, for example, people stealing phones and things like that. You're able to track them. So on one side, it's a really good policy. On the other side, it can be abused by a government that is probably not for its people. And the problem is that as Africa, we have a history of governments that are for themselves and not for the people, and therefore they abuse these kinds of laws. I think that in Kenya, we have seen that last year when people were being abducted from their homes or on the streets you're walking. Obviously, you're being tracked for someone to be able to find you exactly where you are. Things like communication, I have seen places, especially in the West, where people, when they're talking about private matters, they actually leave their mobile phones somewhere because there's a possibility that your conversations, even though you're not on a call, we're having a one-on-one conversation, we're not on a call, but there's a way that the government can trace that conversation. So when you're having very private conversations, your phone needs to be somewhere far away from you. And I think also for me, there's some form of mistrust because we're having a one-on-one conversation. And then all of a sudden, ads that start to show up on your phone are based on the conversation we're having.
I was going to talk about that.
And you are not on call. And so it's like, how are you tracking my conversations in that manner? So that begins to show the extent of data privacy violations that are going on in the world. And I am one of those people who, I think to some extent, I prefer to be off-grid completely. I don't
Really? Are you sure about that?
As time goes, Kelvin, I think I'll move into some upcountry place and I'll have no gadgets in my house.
No podcast there, no. No podcast there.
It will be somewhere where I have to drive there and all the gadgets are there. And I leave them there in the evening and I go to my haven where it is gadget free because there's a lot of data privacy violations. And I think regardless of the laws that are coming in, we're still seeing those violations happening.
Yeah. Privacy is a very touchy subject in the West. Even with all of the privacy conversations we're having, we still see some privacy and data violations, like you've said. The perfect example is the one about ads. I mean, if you're just talking about the products, I remember before I bought one of the microphones I bought in recent times, I was talking about buying a microphone, and then suddenly as I started browsing the web, I was seeing ads for microphones everywhere. Then I'm like, boy, I wasn't even talking about it maybe over a call or even a voiceover call through maybe one of these platforms like WhatsApp and co. But still, my phone just being around me, picking up on the fact that I'm talking about a microphone, then I start to see ads somehow. So sometimes it feels like privacy in the modern age is an illusion. I mean, especially in Africa where there's a lot of mistrust for government, it's very hard to sell this pill of registering phones in a country that has had a couple of incidents with government as it relates to internet regulation. So I understand the skepticism and we would see how this develops. I'm hoping that Nigeria doesn't start to think about it. I'm like, the Nigerian government will see this and be like, I think I like that. I'm hoping SIM card registration is fine for Nigeria for now, because even to get people to register SIM cards, there were a lot of challenges with that. A lot of numbers were banned because they were not clear on who has registered their SIM cards, and at some point they lost the data of people that had registered and still banned them. So yeah, it was a very, very funny situation. So let's not do mobile phones, guys. Thank you very much.
But I think this raises a question for me for startups that are creating technology and innovating in very authoritarian governments and conditions, right? And I think that for a startup founder that is in these regimes, because I think as Kenya, we're beginning to see the formations, and I hope this will not be taken out of context, but we're seeing the formation of an authoritative regime. And I think startup founders in these economies need to think about local surveillance laws. How are you able to ensure that you are in line with local surveillance laws? How do you build apps that are privacy first apps? How do you encrypt? How do you ensure anonymity? How do you secure their storage? How do you understand the legal risks that come with you being forced to share user data when you're in an authoritarian environment? When you're working in some of these environments, you have to realize that your technology will not be neutral, because you never know what could happen and what the government may require of you, especially when you're dealing in communication or you're dealing in finance or something that has to do with civic participation. And I have a question that I would like to ask our listeners, and I hope we will get some answers from them. Can startups still innovate in an authoritarian context without compromising user rights? And what are some of the strategies that they think can be used to ensure that you are protecting and safeguarding user rights while innovating in an environment that seems to consistently violate that right for privacy?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and let's hear what the listeners think.
Yeah. So moving forward, Equinix is investing 140 million. Nigeria, you guys need to give us a break now. You're doing too much. You're just doing too much. Can you calm down? Calm down.
Yeah, we are calm. We are calm. We are getting all of the money, so we are calm.
So Equinix is a global data center provider. It acquired a company in Nigeria called Main One. and it has invested 140 million to expand digital infrastructure across South Africa over the next 2 years. And I'm seeing that they are building a new data center in Port Harcourt, which is new because most data centers are concentrated in Lagos because of the undersea cables that land in Lagos. And now we are seeing them investing in Port Harcourt and increasing connectivity, as well as investing in one of their bigger data centers in Lagos, which is very exciting for you guys and your internet connection, I believe.
Yeah, specifically my internet connection, because Port Harcourt is my city. So when I saw this, I was like, yes, finally. I've always been like, they should leave Lagos, come here. So I generally like when I see developments like this, I'm always happy about it. It just helps to decongest Lagos, because Lagos already has an overpopulation problem. But then Lagos is in such a strategic place that it just makes sense, economic sense for these businesses to go there. I believe Port Harcourt also is in a strategic location. The problem is that the ports in Port Harcourt are not as functional as those in Lagos. That's why a lot of the business doesn't go through Port Harcourt. It's ironic in a way because the name is Port Harcourt. It was named for the ports, but then the ports are not active. But yeah, it's good to see data centers and these big companies looking at locations like Port Harcourt as a destination for their data centers. This would, down the line, improve the internet service in southern Nigeria. And I believe over time they would continue to build more data centers throughout Nigeria. So it's really a welcome development.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we've talked about like what data centers and internet connectivity can do for Nigeria. And I think we're going to see a lot more innovation flow from you guys, which I don't understand how that is possible because there's already too much innovation coming out of Nigeria. I think you need to start exporting your talent to other African nations. So, but I think where internet goes, innovation will follow. And we'll see a lot more giants coming out of Nigeria.
Yeah, the possibilities that come with having data centers closer to your country, closer to your states. We see the development in Europe. We see the innovation coming out of the US. It's like Silicon Valley. And Nigeria tries to push, at least our startup ecosystem tries to push the boundaries of what we can do. I mean, I'm very excited about the development. That's the main thing I can say. So, yeah, let's see what happens in the next couple of years. Speaking of innovation, Ghana is pushing for 5G. Specifically, the Minister of Communication, Digital Technology and Innovations of Ghana is pushing for the 5G launch. Apparently, they contracted a company called Next Generation Infrastructure Company to deliver on its promise to launch 5G. The company won an exclusive contract to develop 5G infrastructure for the next 10 years. So at the moment, only this company is allowed to do the development of 5G infrastructure. But the problem is they have been delaying since 2024 and then even into this year. But the minister is now pushing back that there can be no more delays beyond June. He wants this development to start. I'm not really sure why this company keeps pushing back. Maybe they don't have the tools, maybe they don't have the infrastructure, or maybe the prices of the equipment they would need have gone up since they negotiated the contracts. It's not really clear what's going on here, but there seems to be some disconnects. So things are not moving forward in that direction. So this is a very complex situation and unclear as well.
I agree. I agree 100%. And there's something you usually say that I think is very critical, especially in this situation. You usually say competition is important. You love competition. And I think that is one of the issues that Ghana might be facing. Why would you give monopoly to a company for an
for
entire
10 years
nation?
as well.
That's very dangerous. Competition breeds innovation. And I think one of the things may be that this company is very comfortable knowing that it's the only one that can do this in this country at this moment. And you're not allowing them to receive urgency because someone else is beating them to it. I think that's one of the things that comes to mind straight away, that they have curtailed competition and the capacity to innovate. I also think that sometimes you're just very good at an interview and then execution is a problem.
There are people like that. There are people like that, really.
So it's possible they did very well in the interview, but execution is a little problematic. However, I do think that there's a need for competition. And I was really shocked when I looked at Ghana's penetration, because I'm seeing 83% of their rural areas do not have internet. And I thought it was a Ghana issue until I looked at Kenya as well, and I realized there's only like 29% of our rural population that has internet access. And there's a direct correlation. There's an article that is on one of the government sites called KICTA Net. It's Kenya ICT Net. And they've done this research, and they're showing that there is a strong correlation between ICT access and economic performance, like the GDP of a country. The way a county performs economically right now is directly correlated to its internet access. And so you're seeing counties like Turkana in Kenya that have a penetration of about 21%, and most of it is male, not female. And that directly correlates with how it is performing economically. So it's so important that we ensure this internet access across different provinces or counties or states, depending on how you have demarcated your country, so that everyone has a fighting chance to perform better economically. And so I think that the aspect of competition needs to be reintroduced. And I really like that this gentleman is pushing for his country and to see this done. And he has said that if by June it's not done, then they're going to have a very different conversation. And it's going to include them changing the terms of the contract. That's a good threat to have. And I hope that part of that might be the discussion to allow other people to come into the market and compete for this service.
It's what should have been done in the first place, but it's good that has been stated plainly. Hopefully, this should spur the company to move in the right direction and move things forward. I'm surprised that Ghana doesn't have 5G yet and currently still developing it. It doesn't look like many countries in Africa especially are investing so much in 5G technology at the moment, but it's something that there are a number of conversations around it. So yeah, let's see. In Nigeria at the moment, I believe it's MTN and Airtel that currently have 5G, and then the other telecoms are in the process of working on it, but then even the 5G coverage is not widespread. There are certain areas that you can have 5G connection and still a lot of other areas that is mainly 4G. So it's still in the process of being developed, this technology across Africa. So let's see what happens there.
Yeah, 100%. And still on internet access, we seem to discuss this a lot because I think it's such a foundation for digital transformation in Africa and tech as well. So Starlink has gotten approval to operate in Guinea-Bissau and in Lesotho, and it's starting to grow. I think we're starting to see them have a foothold in Africa. They started really slow. I think they started with Nigeria and Kenya. I know Zimbabwe and Mozambique also have it in. And they have been granted a decade-long, 10 years license to provide satellite internet services nationwide. They are hoping to address the low internet penetration, especially in the rural areas that lack access. And the regulatory flexibility is very in contrast with South Africa, where the laws are a bit more stringent and it has completely stopped Starlink from entry into that market. I don't know whether now, after Lesotho has had some success with it, we will see South Africa kind of loosen up its strict laws to allow Starlink into the market as well.
It's quite interesting that Lesotho and South Africa have similar requirements for foreign companies where they want to own 30% of the company, but South Africa still seems to be a regulatory hurdle for Starlink, and it seems they are unwilling to give up that 30%. And it's not clear whether they had to give up the 30% to enter Lesotho, but somehow they came to an agreement. So maybe it's just a matter of time for them to work out something. But I think the broader conversation is internet access. And I believe the satellite internet is, especially with Starlink, they are changing the game, especially for rural areas that would otherwise just be cut off from the urban areas completely. We are now seeing Starlink's push through satellite internet to bridge the gap. I started looking to see whether there were other satellite internet providers in Nigeria before we started hearing about Starlink. And actually, there have been a couple of them, but it seems they didn't just get enough traction, or they didn't have as much of the push, I guess, financially to put their services in front of as many people as they could, unlike Starlink that is kind of now everywhere. So I'm still pretty much on the fence with Starlink, but it's nothing really personal. I think what they are doing is really cool. It just hasn't yet fit into my workflow in a way that another ISP cannot provide. So maybe that changes over time, but definitely satellite internet is something that changes the game generally, and Starlink is at the forefront of that, picking up all these licenses across the continent. So it's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, and I like what you've said about traction, because I think Elon Musk is a very good example of using your personal brand to grow your businesses. Without the personal brand that is Elon Musk, Starlink would not be growing as fast as it is. But I think that that's a lesson for startup founders to see, and it's another path into success for your businesses where you use your own personal brand and you grow that personal brand. I think Vusi Tembekwaya is another person who has used that strategy. And a lot of other global business leaders, they have used their personal brands to grow and build their businesses. And I think it's an investment that is worth looking at in growing, because once your personal brand is synonymous and people have trusted you, then they begin to trust the products that you bring into the market. That's just something that came to mind when you talked about the other satellite service providers that have been in the market.
Yeah, that's a very good point you highlighted with Elon Musk. I remember a couple of years back on Twitter where I saw that Tesla doesn't do any adverts. And I started actively looking for Tesla adverts, and I've never really seen anyone. So basically, Elon Musk is the advertising framework for his companies generally. And I mean, that's a very cost-effective strategy when you think about it, because a lot of companies, and especially startups, spend a lot of their budget on marketing. So when you think a founder has this massive brand and he can use that audience that he has created over time to just push them into any product or company that is building, it just saves you a lot of cost. So yeah, it's definitely one that startup founders should think about. And there are a couple of startup founders that I follow in the Nigerian space that are beginning to do the exact same thing. I see it and I'm like, oh, I can see you're trying to do this thing. And it's quite cool to see. So yeah, we'll see how Starlink continues to develop in Africa. Moving on to the final topic, a startup called Historia in Tunisia is reconstructing the past through technology. when I think about tech, especially things like programming, AI, 3D, VR, I always think about the applications of this technology. What can you build with these technologies that would be helpful to people? What they are doing is they are building 3D models of historic scenes, starting with Tunisia because the founder is from Tunisia, and allowing people to experience these 3D models and I think VR in a way that you couldn't experience. I mean, if you want to learn about a historical site, you would read historical accounts of these sites and try to get as much description as you can. You can't really see it. But if you're able to reconstruct these scenes based on at least the available information, it brings a whole new experience to history. And I think that's a very positive and very impactful solution that you're building.
Yeah, when I saw this story, I got really excited, like super excited. I can't even tell you. And I'm even more grateful that it's an African innovation. There's something that has always bothered me, and that has been that we really don't get the real picture of African history in the content that has been produced in the world so far. When I look at the movies and the books that have been written about Africa, they have been somebody else attempting to tell our story. And I think so many of the richness of the culture and the stories of the African people have been lost. And the problem is we have waited for other people to tell our story, and we need to start to tell our own stories. It pisses me off, Kelvin. Like, pisses me off when we talk about people like Vasco da Gama and the prime ministers of Britain as the heroes of history. Who are the heroes of African history? Right? Why is Shaka Zulu not a bigger story for Africans? Why is Menelik II, who beat Italy, not a part of African history? I was recently learning that before people discovered Africa, we had African pirates on the seas discovering all these new lands in Europe and Asia and all those places before it was called cool, and some person from Europe apparently discovered Africa. We had women warriors of Benin who are the reason why the woman king was created. We have a history of the richest man recorded in the world who was a black man, right? He was an African, and he actually caused an entire country to have economic issues because he was too rich in gold. So he went through Cairo and he kind of just disrupted the entire economy. Those are histories that I think we should tell, stories that we should tell ourselves so that we can enrich our children and they can learn from that history and then build on it and create an even bigger Africa. Because before colonization, we were big civilizations. We had serious developments here in Africa, and I would like that story to come out. So I hope that this tech would be the beginning of that, of us telling the richness of the history, the true history of Africa and the wealth and culture that is African, so that we can celebrate our own heroes and our own history and tell our own stories as opposed to waiting for someone else to tell our narrative. So I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I made a lot of points there. When it comes to history, I am very well drilled, especially with Nigerian history, because my mom is a professor of history in a federal university here. So when it comes to history, I am very well drilled. And yeah, I'm very close to my mom, and she talks to me about a lot of things. But particularly when she talks to me about school and her students and things like that, she touches on a lot of history. Some of the problem is, yes, we need to get involved in telling our own stories. And this startup is definitely creating the technology for that in a different way. But I believe there are also mediums at the moment that we already use to tell some of our stories. For example, we have Nollywood in Nigeria, the third largest movie industry in the world. So my issue with even Nollywood is that sometimes when they want to do historical movies, they don't put their best work there for me. And I remember a couple of movies now over the last few years that I have been excited about because I would see, oh, it's based on this historical story or based on that historical story. And I'll be so excited. I'll be looking forward to it. I'll mark the calendar. And then by the time the movie comes, I'm like, you could have done a better job. For example, let's say we are talking about a legendary warrior, especially when it comes to the Europeans invading Nigeria. And you're talking about this very powerful warrior. And then in the movie, they just make him look weak. You hear about him, and then by the time he shows up in the movie, they just conquer him very quickly. Like, make it dramatic. That's why it's a movie, right? Make it dramatic. Make it make believe like Hollywood. You don't have to do it the Hollywood way, but you can't just see, for example, Captain America go down like that very easily. There's a dramatic fight. And then eventually he will come back somehow. They will write it into the story that he comes back somehow. Even if it's historical and the person lost, you still make it meaningful in a way that, okay, me that's a Nigerian watching this can see the effort this person tried to put to save his people. And it inspires me to also want to be strong, also dare to be great. But a lot of the time, in my own opinion at least, I don't see this effort. So it's always good when you have different mediums to tell your story. That's why I'm very excited about what this startup is building, and I wish them all the best. And I look forward to using their technology at some point.
100%. I'm actually going to go look for their application and because I'm really and what you've said really makes sense because I think we tell our stories from a post-colonial outlook.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And we emphasize that story of that we were weak. And me, I'd like to see the Mau Mau story told because I am a daughter of Mau Mau. My great grandmother was Mau Mau. My grandmother was Mau Mau. One of my great grandfathers died in Mau Mau. And those were stories of heroes. I want to see that told from an African's point of view, not from a Western person's point of view. So yeah, definitely really looking forward to it and rooting for them.
Yeah. All right. And that's a wrap. Thank you everyone for listening. If you have enjoyed the podcast, leave a comment. Don't forget to answer Karen's question earlier. And yeah, as always, it was a good conversation with you, Karen. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Tech Tides Africa podcast. Remember, leave a comment or share with your friends. We'll see you next Thursday at the same time and place you get your podcast. Until then, stay well.